which had been designed for the invasion of England. But despite grand expectations, Axis naval forces failed to make an impact. Russian tugs and barges had an extremely shallow draft, so torpedoes passed harmlessly underneath them. Their naval bases and ships were hit hard by the Red Army Air Force. Axis naval operations were abandoned. It remained critical to break the siege of Leningrad. The road of life, by water or ice, brought in the bare minimum to keep the city fed, and the troops supplied with fuel and ammunition. 6 months later, in November 1942, the front commanders, General Zhukov and Marshal Voroshilov, began to plan Operation Iskra. It was decided to attack once more at the bottleneck, where the German encirclement was thinnest. Units of the Volkhov front would attack from without, as troops of the Leningrad front attacked from within. The artillery barrage began at dawn on the 12th of January 1943. As the last shells whistled overhead, the assault began. But everywhere the Red Army ran into fierce resistance from well-entrenched German troops. T-34s could only crawl across what was effectively a heavily cratered peat bog. They were easy pickings for the German anti-tank guns. But the simultaneous attack on both fronts began to bear fruit. After 2 days, just 2 kilometers separated the Soviet troops. These final meters proved the hardest. Soviet tanks were knocked out or got stuck in the bog. It was up to the infantry to storm the German positions. General Feduninsky, now deputy front commander, repeatedly visited the front line to urge his men on. He ordered attacks around the clock. There was to be no let-up for the German defenders. The German tactic, as before, was to hold key positions along the transport network. Work settlements number 1 and number 5 on the only road between the lake and the rail terminus were turned into fortresses. If the Red Army could just cut the road, the German defense was doomed. Von Kuchler had to decide whether to hold on or withdraw from the bottleneck. He opted to hold on. Under unrelenting assault from both sides, the German defenses began to crumble. The Red Army, sustaining massive losses all the way, fought through the intricate German defenses. At the last moment, German units at Schliesselburg made a dash for safety, but not many made it. At midnight on the 18th of January 1943, Yuri Levitan, the voice of Soviet wartime radio, was able to announce, after 7 days of fighting, troops of the Volkhov and Leningrad fronts met on the 18th of January and raised the siege of Leningrad. In just 3 weeks, a railway was built across the cratered landscape of the bottleneck. It was just 5 kilometers from the German lines and under constant shell fire. Leningrad was still on the front line, but at last it was getting enough food and fuel. The Red Army lacked the strength to push the Germans back any further. The reserves of German Army Group North had arrived and were dug in on the high ground. German defenses were traditionally built around the MG-34 or the MG-42 machine gun. The rest of the infantry were effectively there to support the machine gun team. By autumn 1943, the Red Army had developed tactics for attacking German infantry. Soviet rifle platoons, supported by artillery and mortars, aimed to wipe out enemy machine gun positions in the first few minutes of the assault. the remaining rifle-armed Germans would be seriously outgunned by Soviet troops armed with submachine guns. But from late 1943, the Germans began to change the balance once more with the introduction of the MP-43. Now, if the infantry squad's machine gun team was knocked out, a squad armed with the new MP-43s could still provide heavy, accurate fire against enemy attackers. Hitler himself gave the new weapon its name, Sturmgewehr, the assault rifle. It wasn't until the beginning of 1944 that the Stavka launched the operation that would finally end the siege of Leningrad. By then, German Army Group North had had nearly 2 years to dig in on the outskirts of the city. The Stavka planned to begin the operation at the Oranienbaum bridgehead, which had stubbornly held out against the Germans thanks to the heavy guns of its coastal fort. From here, the Red Army would launch itself against the flank of German Army Group North. Leading the attack will be General Feduninsky at the head of the Second Shock Army, which had been secretly redeployed to the bridgehead under the cover of darkness. By attacking from the coast, the massive firepower of the Baltic Fleet could be used to support the assault, with more than 100 heavy naval guns available for the operation. They included the guns of the battleship Mara, refloated after being sunk by Stukas in 1941, and the enormous coastal guns of the Krasnaya Gorka fort. The assault began on the 14th of January 1944. Soviet newspapers and radio carried no reports about the operation, but the people of Leningrad could hear the distant thunder of the bombardment. They knew what it meant, that the final offensive was underway, the one that would end the siege once and for all. No one doubted its success. The attack from Oranienbaum caught Army Group North by surprise. In the face of an overwhelming Soviet assault, German defenses collapsed. A week later, Soviet troops, laden with captured trophies, met at the town of Ropsha. German Army Group North's retreat became a rout. The front line raced away from Leningrad. The rumble of guns receded into the distance. At long last, silence descended over the city of Leningrad. According to official reports, 642,000 civilians died during the siege of Leningrad. But many deaths never made it into an official report. The real total was probably nearer 1 million. 3% were caused by bombs and shells, 97% by starvation. About 1.8 million people were evacuated from Leningrad during the war. By 1945, the city's population was just 1/5 of what it had been at the start of the war. This was the longest siege of a large city in World War II, and the costliest siege in history. Army Group North was bogged down in the forests and swamps around Leningrad for more than 2 years. It comprised 1/5 of German strength on the Eastern Front. But pinned outside Leningrad, it was unable to influence the war's decisive battles, all of which were fought on other fronts. Far to the south, in the vast open expanse between Kharkov and the Volga River, the Red Army would have to learn to fight another kind of war, highly mobile armored warfare. And it was here in the south in 1942 that the world would learn the name of another Soviet city, Stalingrad.